Welcome to the Real Estate Syndication Show. Whether you are a seasoned investor or building a new real estate business, this is the show for you. Whitney Sewell talks to top experts in the business. Our goal is to help you master real estate syndication. And now your host, Whitney Sewell.
Lionshare Bookkeeping believes the key to generating wealth is understanding where it comes from and where it needs to go. They provide bookkeeping and financial coaching exclusively to real estate investors, focusing on cash flow, strategy, and action. Go to lionshare.bookkeeping.com/apartments to connect with them now. This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today, our guest is Terrie Schauer. With 20 years plus experience as a real estate investor and property manager, Terrie is CEO and founder of My Room Gestion, a property management and real estate consulting group based in Montreal, Canada. She's a leading authority on applying mindfulness principles to real estate investing and has written the #1 best-selling book on the topic, Mindful Landlord. She's the co-host of two wealth and real estate podcasts, the Mindful Wealth podcast and the Real Estate Investors Club podcast. Her clients include business owners, executives, and professionals who want to hedge the rat race and gain financial freedom through real estate. Now, Terrie shares many great things that I think any of us should be thinking about today. But, a big thing is bridging that gap between rat race and true wealth. She goes into what is true wealth, right? And just holistic wealth and not, she got mortgaging, your health, your family, all those things in the process of finding that true wealth. Does your health take a back seat, as you're trying to gain the so-called quote, success, end quote, in business or in life. But she just brings many things to the forefront that I just hope you are thinking about as you are pursuing that success that you are after, and helps you to think through, like, is bigger always better? When she reached financial independence, I think you are going to be very surprised at how many doors she had before she reached financial independence. And so it's going to be eye-opening when you hear that number. So I hope you have a great day and learn a lot from this episode with Terrie. Terrie, welcome to the show. Honored to meet you. I mean, I was telling you just before we started recording, just reading your bio, I'm thankful to meet. Sounds like you have accomplished a lot, and I'm looking forward to you being able to share that with the listeners today. Tell me, everybody asks, tell me a little about your background, right? Well, of course, we want to know a little bit about Terrie before maybe she exploded in this business, and her business exploded. What were you doing, and what led you to real estate?
Yeah. So I actually started very early and almost in a way by accident. When I moved to university, there wasn't space in student residence. So I ended up living in this big, funky student house that was really not managed. And because it was such a mess, they needed a manager, and they voted me in so the story is actually, I cleaned out the piles of garbage that there were in front of the house. I got there. I didn't want to live in that kind of thing. And I'm like, okay, let me just clean this up. And then 12 hours later, after moving out of my parents' house, all of a sudden I'm a house manager. Yeah. So and then I did that for a couple of years, and I liked it so much that when I moved to another city, I was like, okay, let me rent a house and set this up. So, I went to see Dad, and I'm like, Dad, can you co-sign a lease on this big house for me? Because I want to portion it out and rent it to people. Parents were a little skeptical, but they kind of went with it. Then I did that. It worked. And then I moved back to my home city, which is Montreal. And I went to see Dad again and was like, Dad, I've been managing properties for 6 years now. Do you want to lend me a down payment? And I'm going to go ahead and buy a triplex and run the same business model. And then things kind of went from there. And that was kind of how it started. But it's as if I always sort of was doing real estate without realizing I was doing real estate.
Yeah, sounds like a young accidental landlord taught you
exactly.
a lot, right?
Exactly.
Maybe that opened your eyes to the possibility of what real estate and rental real estate could do for you. Is that right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think a lot of people who start out in the industry, I happened to read Rich Dad Poor Dad when I was 22, and I was like, oh wow, I really need to never get a job. And so that I kind of took that advice and really never got a job. I finished, I studied for a long time. I ended up doing a PhD. And then when I finished that, I got a job in a property management company with the idea that I was going to learn the business model of property management in order to be able to open that kind of company. And then that's what I did.
Now, your father signed on a couple of notes here for you, or helped you, or partnered with you, whichever way you want to say it. But, was he and maybe other families supportive of this real estate thing that you were doing?
So, I mean, I come from sort of an entrepreneurial family. My dad owns a small and medium sized manufacturing business. My brother's in tech, and he owns relatively doing well startup at the moment. But nobody in my immediate vicinity really did real estate. So it's not like I was able to, kind of go and ask dad for help with that aspect of things. But I think, definitely of building the track record of being able to sort of manage things and then scale them. I was able to, convince dad to help me out financially. And then that, one thing led to another. So
it's awesome that you already had like some entrepreneurial spirit in your family, right? I think that helps you so much when you're trying to become an entrepreneur yourself. Otherwise, it's so much pushback, I feel. So now you are helping many people, right? Bridge that gap between what you call rat race and true wealth, and you call it holistic wealth. I want us to dive into that and what that looks like. You started sharing a little bit about that before we started recording, and I was like, wait a minute, this is, I want the listeners to hear that as well, and us talk about that. And so let's jump right in.
Yeah. So I think, one of my frustrations with the way things get done in real estate is that I feel like there's a lot of bigger is better thinking. And what that translates into is, more leverage, more doors, and this kind of competitive aspect that when you go to a lot of real estate seminars, people are like, okay, how big is your portfolio? How many millions? How many doors? Da, 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 da. And it becomes I don't want to say something rude here, but it becomes really a bit of an opportunity for people to show off about stuff. And I think that
how they judge success often, right?
Exactly. It becomes about sort of these external markers of how big is my pile. And I think that for a lot of people who get into investing, myself included, I was always more interested in the freedom that I could get from being financially independent or to supplementing my income. Initially took me 10 years to reach the point where I was financially independent from my investments. And so especially initially, I was able to do that in a really small way. I reached financial independence, if you want to put it that way, with 9 doors, and I caught a good wave in the market that I happened to operate in. But I was definitely, not leveraging like crazy, and it was very comfortable and yet small scale. And I think that sometimes that voice is missing in, this loud, bigger is better kind of, real estate hype environment. So
I love how, you brought that to the forefront there as far as you reached financial freedom with 9 doors. And I hope that's even encouraging to so many people, right? They don't have to have 1,000 units to achieve that financial independence. And man, that should be motivating right there. So man, I hope that was probably motivating to you, right? Once that hit you, that you had accomplished that. How long did that take?
Well, it took 10 years. And I was not super, aggressive about necessarily acquiring more things. Like I said, I caught a good upswing in the market that I'm in. So that obviously helped me. But I was also very mindful of my business model. And so whenever I was able to, upsell or do something to increase the rents, do something to decrease my expenses in my business project, I grabbed that, right? If you're doing the small is beautiful thing, you can really get that running in a very lean way so it can work for you. And I think that's one thing. And then the other thing is also I did a lot of mental work on my own overheads. And, I don't have an extravagant lifestyle. I have exactly the lifestyle that I want. But at the same time, sometimes that requires you to check yourself because very often, you can get sucked into this keeping up with the Joneses thing. And I don't live in a crazy neighborhood. I have a medium-sized house in a middle-class neighborhood, and that works very well for my family. And as a result, I don't have all this stress and pressure that maybe other people put on when they take on these financial responsibilities on their own expense side, So it's really, you have to see this as a balancing act. On the one hand, you have your investment side, which is managed a certain way. And on the other hand, you have your personal expenses and think is this new toy really going to make me happy? Or is it better to buy 4 chickens and fence in my yard and play with them with my kid? What actually really brings you more happiness in the end of the day? So
I like that. And just how you talk about, you don't believe that we should mortgage our well-being. right, in our ethics to participate. What you call it, the bank account Olympics. It's interesting. I want you to elaborate a little more on that, like mortgaging your well-being, your ethics. What have you seen, happen like that in our industry, and help us to like be on guard against that, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think if we start with, the ethics, I maybe can't speak to I can speak to what happens in my specific market because there's some practices here that are, as in my mind, not the best. So I live in Montreal, which is heavily rent controlled. And so there's a sense in which when you take over buildings, there are all sorts of unethical ways to basically turn people out of their houses. Right. And so, some landlords really jump on the not nice aspects of that. And I mean, obviously in a rent control environment, when, you're not sad when a rent controlled tenant decides to leave and you can readjust the rent, but at the same time, how you manage that transition and the kind of positions you put people in. And also realizing again, we have pretty strict tenancy laws here, and there are ways to game those laws and there are ways to fraud them and ways that, you won't really get caught out if you do that. But in my own practice, I kind of just take that off the table. I don't, I play by the law, and I assume that housing, at least in, the place where I live, has been put in this special category of asset where you have to treat your tenants with a certain level of respect. And so I assume that those laws are there to protect those people. And so I work by them scrupulously. Same thing with, going on to tax evasion. I know that, sometimes in real estate, people tend to do a lot of stuff cash, and this is off the books and this and that. And, again, I'm happy in a sense to pay my taxes because I feel like that supports the society, the community in which I live. And it's an important way to redistribute wealth. And so, no, I don't engage in some of these sort of tax evasion processes that maybe I see other people doing. So,
yeah. Yeah, that topic alone, man. I talk to my CPA often, and I'm like, well, yeah, I want to save every penny I can, but I want to pay every penny that I owe as well. I just want to be very upfront about. I don't want to be operating in any gray area in any part of the business, ever. No, I wanted to back up a little bit too, and you talked about, really the question is bigger always better. And in the syndication business, obviously that's why a lot of people get in syndication, right? Well, why not go buy, a $30 million building versus, a $200,000 duplex? If you can make that happen, that's easier said than done, of course. But that's often why, people would move that route. And it made me think about, mortgaging our well-being, like you said, and the workload, right, that most people don't anticipate. I know I was guilty of that as well, getting started in commercial real estate, but even the mortgaging almost the well-being of my family, for a good while, but just had no idea up front the toll that was going to take. Or just the requirement of them also. Have you seen that? Have you seen that as well? Not just on the investor or the person who's trying to become an investor or grow this real estate business, but also on their family as they try to scale and move really fast. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, for me, the sort of aha moment with this was my son's now 5, and in the year he was born, I set these really aggressive targets in terms of what I wanted to do, and I worked like crazy, and really was not there as much as I felt like I kind of should have been. Or when I was there, I was, texting, answering the phone, not present, right? Because you can be physically there, but not fully present. Mm-hmm. And after that year, I looked at the wonderful results that my business had, and I was like, was I really happy this year? Is that really, do I really feel does that number actually make me feel better about my life? And the answer to it was no. And, at that point, I kind of had to take a step back and say that stress is not personal. When you put yourself under a lot of stress and become snippy and, whatever else, everybody around you is living that too. And I'm not sure exactly, I guess becoming a parent, nothing brings that home when you're responsible for somebody else, but be it your spouse or I'm very close to my parents as well. And I know that in those relationships, when I am stretched in other aspects of my life, those relationships become less pleasant. So I think it's really important. It's not just you taking something on. It's everybody around you is by default taking that on as well. So the trade-offs have to be worth it, That's interesting that I just think that's a neat thought right there, that the other people seem to be taking that thing on also. No doubt they see that in you, and, it adds stress to, it's just ones that love you, right? And are very close to you, definitely affects them. You also, talk about like bridging the gap between a rat race and true wealth. And any, I just wanted you to be able to elaborate on that. Maybe any examples of people you've helped, or just the thought process behind, between the rat race and true wealth, and what that looks like.
Yeah. So I think a lot of real estate thinking frames, your JOB, right? Like the world of wage labor as the rat race. And it's as if real estate has come somehow seen as this like free ticket to get out of the rat race. And I don't think that setting up that distinction really serves us very well, because I know a lot of people who are very heavily into real estate and they're definitely in a rat race. They're on a different kind of a treadmill where they feel like, either they have to do too many deals, they've set up their management in a bad way. And so they're picking up the phone all the time. And so like, they're very much on a treadmill. And I also know, again, other people who really enjoy what they do for work. And so they've kept a day job, but they've used real estate to supplement that income and maybe take some pressure off. So again, like, I think, it's dangerous when we start to have black and white thinking about real estate good, wage labor bad. There are certain cost structures associated with that, right? With active income on one side and passive income on the other. But a rat race is really anything where you're being forced to run in a hamster wheel faster than supports your well-being. Whereas to me, true wealth is, again, it's not having masses of money in your bank account. It's having a balanced and fulfilling life where the different pieces are given their due. So, if you have a family, like you're there for your kids' sporting events, whatever, you're looking after your own health. You're not a stress ball so that you're ruining everybody's life, like all these, you have time to give back to your community or be active in it. Like there's all these other things that support well-being that really have nothing to do with money. So in my opinion, that's kind of what true wealth means.
I love the thought behind what true wealth is, and thinking through that, just like you're explaining. And you mentioned even health too. I know, like when we were just really in the thick of it, man, health just takes a back seat, right? Or it did, for a good while, to a big extent. So I can relate to a lot of that. But even like when you're in the thick of it for that long, like learning to pull back after you kind of have built the business. That's been a difficulty of mine as well. It's like, man, I'm used to working that 60, 80 hours a week and making it happen and just saying, hey, whatever it takes. But now that it's not required anymore, it's still difficult to pull that back. Right. And my wife helps keep me in check of that. Thank the Lord. But is that something you see as well? It's like, man, not only are they, have built their own rat race almost, but it's like just mentally, like it's just really hard to shut that off and just be mentally present, like you mentioned, with the family at the dinner table or wherever.
Absolutely. And I think so in my book Mindful Landlord, basically I go through some of the, let's say, different phases or mental obstacles that people go through, and there's kind of a front-loaded aspect of obstacles. So let's say when people are starting, they usually face limiting beliefs about themselves. They have to deal with fear. They have to sort of, overcome various things that are holding them back. And then they go through this period where they start to succeed, right? And like, it's wonderful. Like when you master something or you start getting good at something, and then all of a sudden, the snowball starts rolling, and you're like, wow, I'm actually riding this wave, right? And that's an awesome moment. And then you kind of get into this, now I'm successful phase. And then, like you said, the next challenge becomes learning where to lean in and where to pull back. And then you end up in this conversation of, when is enough enough? What am I actually doing this for? What are the trade-offs that I'm making? I think, referencing health is a very good example, because I think, sometimes people, if they don't neglect their family, then they end up ultimately neglecting themselves, and either the diet suffers, or, they don't put in the time in the gym that would keep them healthy. And then you end up paying a price for that ultimately. So, yeah.
No doubt about it. And the rat race keeps that going forever, right? If you build that type of business model, any tips there as far as like from the beginning, somebody's getting started today and they're thinking, wow, well, is that really success? What I thought it was, right? If I could make $1 million a year, that may seem so great and grand, right? But man, you don't really realize maybe what it's going to take. But then again, depending on how your business is structured, that may be even a worse rat race than you're in now, right? Depending on how you handle that. Any tips on how you and how you've seen other people be successful from the beginning in thinking that through? Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things is just understanding kind of how to relate to time. Which is that, let's say, for me, again, when I had my son, or even now, like I just there's certain blocks of the day that no matter what's going on at work, I will not work in those hours because those hours belong to my family. So I can work before, I can work after, I can have all the stress I want before 5 o'clock. But when it's time to be at school to pick him up, the phone is on silent and I'm just not taking calls anymore. And I've actually, for people who are kind of able to cultivate this balance, this is something that comes up again and again of doing whatever it is you have to do to be present for the relationships and the activities that like sort of keep you on level ground. So I think that like really deciding ahead of time what times you're going to block off, and like, let's say, don't take calls during dinner time, like just make those decisions that no matter what's going on, that is off limits. So I think, that's one thing. The other thing that I read I'm going to try to remember the book. It's Gary Keller, The One Thing. One thing that I really found useful in there is he talks about the necessity of being sometimes out of balance. And his idea is that if you want to become like really excellent at something, you're going to have to accept that sometimes like you kind of get off, like you get a little bit out of whack. And then it's the ability to bring yourself back on track. And, I had a sort of a career as an athlete, like before I guess I got really into real estate, and I was in combat sports. And so definitely like when you're in a training camp, you're preparing for competition, you got to cut weight, like that's definitely a period in which you're going to be out of balance. And so if you accept, let's say that's 6 weeks or a month before you have a certain fight, like you're not going to be like, let's say, at your best for everything else in your life. But if you mark that off, you say, okay, here I'm going to spin out. And then after that, I'm going to take a week off. I'm going to go on vacation with my family. I'm going to do whatever I need to do to like bring those things back into whack. Like, I think that's another way of kind of compensating for when you do have to make those, it's crunch time and you have to like make those things happen, then make sure that afterwards you have a way to bring yourself back. So.
No, I like that. And knowing that up front too. And combat sports, interesting. That's so cool. But what would you have done differently? Like knowing all this now, where you're at in your business, is there anything that, a few years back that, that Terrie would say about, like you would say about your own business, that if I'd done this would be better or whatever. Anything.
Yeah. I mean, I would have bought more buildings. I think back sometimes to deals that I passed up early on in my career that I could have done if I had just like stretched a little bit more. So I think I would have done those deals. And I think I would have also just maybe trusted myself to go through some of those growth phases, because I think that like very often, like it's been my experience that you kind of like plateau for a while, let's say, and then you go through like a real learning phase and then you plateau again. So like, I'll give you an example, like when I went from just really investing with my own money to doing, I guess what you guys call, like what we call joint ventures, I guess you guys call syndication. Like I started doing some syndication deals. That was like kind of a real jump. And it was stressful. I had my old way of doing things for 10 years. And like learning that new aspect of the game, really kind of put me out of my comfort zone. And I think that like, if you just lean into those moments and say, okay, I'm going to feel uncomfortable. And as long as I have good advisors around me, and I think I'm like mitigating most of the risks, it's normal that when you stretch that you're just going to feel a little bit off balance. And that's just growth,
Yeah, no, that's great advice right there. You have to be willing to be uncomfortable, right? If you plan to grow. Do you have any predictions, just for the real estate market in general over the next 6 to 12 months?
Oh, wow. That's so difficult. Again, like, I think it's difficult to say like, the market writ large, like then we'd be talking about North America, I suppose, or, even like world real estate markets. What I do observe is I think that governments are going to have trouble raising interest rates very much. They're going to have to adjust a little bit, but I don't see that with all the debt that they've taken on, that they're really going to be able to raise interest rates very much. So I think that's going to sort of, if we're in a low interest environment, that means lending is going to continue to be, I guess, friendly, if you want to put it that way. And I also think real estate as an asset class, there has an air of safety about it, where if the stock market is kind of going crazy, I think people maybe feel a little bit more confident about real estate as something that's safer. Again, it's tough to really generalize because, in Canada, our banks are so conservative. We really didn't go through a 2008 crash. So I think maybe, in the US, like that's always with a little bit more caveat because everybody remembers that you guys had like a major negative event. Whereas in Canada, like if things are so regulated that maybe it's a false sense of security, but like basically we believe, our banks have not had that major correction. So the housing market has not had a major correction. So
no, appreciate you just sharing your thoughts about it. Nobody has that crystal ball, right? But
yeah.
You hear how different people are looking at it. And is there a way recently that you've improved your business that we could apply to ours?
Well, I think like pretty much everyone with COVID has gone through this like big technological leap forward. And like we were implementing some of those things before, but I think now like just in terms of automation, like, before COVID, let's say there was a lot more in-person stuff. Whereas now we've outfitted, like all of our properties have lock boxes with keyless entry, all of our tenant applications, everything's done online. I'm even able to pilot like some of my contractors like on FaceTime, which were all things that when you didn't want to be in contact with people, like everybody was, we were scrambling to put that together, but now it's actually really turned into kind of a major time saver. Though when I talk about this, I also always mention the fact that, it's sort of a double-edged sword because I feel like with all this automation that has effects on various sectors of service jobs. And so let's say now if you're able to handle things with less people or, even some people who don't have such good, let's say, computer skills, don't know their way around a smartphone so well. For example, I at one point I had to lose an assistant because she just didn't know her way around a cell phone that well. And like, that's just kind of a weird thing that like 3 years ago, or like a cleaning lady, that's it. I had to also get rid of, a cleaning lady because, for example, we had an Airbnb. She didn't know how to use the Airbnb app. So that means that every time we'll have a cleaning, I have to text her, I have to make sure she's there. I have to, you know what I mean? And so it just becomes, people put themselves out of a job with that. And so like that kind of scares me a little bit just in terms of people not upgrading their skills. So. Yeah.
No, that almost goes back to the conversation around being willing to get uncomfortable, right?
Absolutely.
To grow. Yeah. And I can definitely see that. What about a couple of daily habits that you are disciplined about that have helped you achieve success?
Well, with an athletic background, like I really never compromise the hour in the gym. I'm also like really on top of my diet. And I find that like doing those two things, first of all, like it really clears my mind, like I at this point I practice Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So like when you're grappling, like you can't be anywhere else. You have to be like right there with the person in front of you or you're going to get choked. And like the fact of just being in that kind of a thing where you really have to be 100% present. Like I find that helps me, release stress. And then just being really focused about how I eat means that my energy levels are good and, I'm kind of not like bouncing all over the place. So I think, yeah.
No, that's awesome to you. The hour in the gym is important to you, right? Yeah, that's incredible. And what about if you had to pick one thing that's contributed to your success, what would that be?
One thing, I think like being flexible, in the sense of always having my eye out for what's the best way to do this or what's the best interpretation of the situation. And I think if you're like looking to grow through things, you're going to have to find your way through discomfort. You're going to sometimes have knee-jerk reactions that don't serve you or character traits that you have to sort of keep in check. If I give you an example, I used to be super shy. And part of the issue was that like, I just never put myself like out there in social situations in order to get over it. And, at some point I decided, okay, I'm going to just decide that this is not a major character flaw. And I'm just going to put myself in situations where I feel uncomfortable till it goes away. And that's exactly what happened. Like, I don't consider myself shy at all anymore. And like, had I not reframed that in my mind, I would never have been able to take the steps to do something about it. So I think really having an eye on like, what's the best interpretation, not what do I, what's my default setting, right? Like, no, what's the best way to think about this?
You had to be willing to be uncomfortable again, right?
Yeah.
You had to put yourself out there. Yeah. I mean, that's a great example. And most will not, right? And most will not be willing to get up in front of the room and talk about themselves or talk about their business or talk about, or, even teaching or helping other people or just approaching people at a networking event, right? To meet somebody else for the first time, that can be pretty scary. So congratulations to you for putting yourself out there and making that happen. How do you like to give back?
Well, I think, first of all, writing the book was, a way of like, I guess I set out my ideas on what on the matter of how mindfulness, the more you bring it into anything you do, the more balanced and like sort of fulfilling a life you can have. And then that sort of led to me co-hosting 2 podcasts. So I co-host the Real Estate Investors Club podcast, which is like a pretty like Montreal local way for people to exchange information, learn about deals in the local market. That's 100% free, obviously, for people who listen. And same thing with, I co-host the Mindful Wealth podcast. And that's just like specifically these kind of conversations about when is enough, what really brings true happiness, what is true wealth, to what extent do we pursue external markers of success, to what extent do we do internal work, and having like really challenging conversations with people and asking difficult questions, because I think, also like in the environment today, things tend to be so polarized that like very often we don't want to sit down and just have an honest, not hackles up conversation with someone who thinks something different from us. And, at this point, I see that as kind of my contribution to just, really push. And like the guests on the Montreal podcast, like we've had a Navy SEAL on, we've had like very Marxist academics who are, really anti kind of Wall Street, anti investor capitalism, and just probing them on like, okay, why do you think this? And what are your solutions? And how can we import some of those that thinking into us in the investment industry, how we behave? And I think those kind of like across the aisle conversations are just like very, very necessary now.
Love that. And when you can have those conversations and be friends, right? And really seek out someone's point of view like that, that is very valuable. I think it helps that person also almost as much as anyone. Right?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And like, I think it's what you bring to the conversation as much as it is like, I think people sometimes want to kind of ram home their opinion and are like, oh, if only things were done my way, the world would be better. But like, no, like often you have half the answer. And somebody who's sitting in a different ideological position from you, they probably just have a very different, set of experiences and a starting point. And like, maybe they can draw your attention to something you didn't think about. And somehow, unfortunately, that in public discourse today, like we've kind of like lost that. And I find it's really too bad. So
that's incredible. Now, just this morning around the breakfast table, we were talking with my boys and we were talking about, how oftentimes instead of just telling somebody what you think, like asking questions can oftentimes, help share, just really why that person feels the way they do. Or it can even help, them see your point of view as well without just coming at them with, this is the answer, pointing a finger at them. So no, that's a great answer as well. Well, Terrie, it's been a pleasure to get to meet you and hear more about your story. I love the holistic wealth type of thinking like you've helped us think through today. And that bigger is not always better. But man, how you received financial independence at 9 doors. I think that's a big accomplishment, I feel like. Right? That it didn't take 1,000 doors or 2,500 doors or whatever, but now you're helping other people to bridge that gap as well. So tell them how they can find you and learn more about you.
Yeah, so I'm just findable on pretty much any social media with my name that you see at the bottom of the screen. It's Terrie Schauer. So I have a website, terrieschauer.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook.
Thank you for listening to the Real Estate Syndication Show, brought to you by LifeBridge Capital. LifeBridge Capital works with investors nationwide to invest in real estate, while also donating 50% of its profits to assist parents who are committing to adoption. LifeBridge Capital, making a difference, one investor and one child at a time. Connect online at www.lifebridgecapital.com for free material and videos to further your success.